There are stories that are told in broad daylight, with laughter ringing in the air and children listening wide-eyed. And then there are the stories that elders lower their voices to tell, the kind that make the fire crackle differently, the kind that make the nights feel darker. This is one of those stories. In a village where wealth was power and beauty was a curse, a single wish was spoken, twisting fate in a way no one could have foreseen. It started with a man too simple to know the weight of his words and a woman who longed for more than the life she was given. But when the gods listen too closely, when the winds carry desires into the unseen realm, wishes do not always come as blessings. Some come as a lesson. Some come as a warning. And some come with a price no one is ready to pay. So, listen carefully. Because once you step into this tale, there is no turning back. In the heart of the great kingdom of Omego, where the sun bathed the earth in golden hues and the sound of gem drums echoed through the lush valleys, lived a woman whose name alone sent shivers down spines, Aina. She was the wife of Moisa, a man of little wealth and even less ambition, whose simple life as a subsistence farmer made him the village's laughingstock. While the men of Omego battered for gold, wrestled wild beasts, and charmed their way into wealth, Moisa preferred the quiet rhythm of the land, his hands more accustomed to tilling the soil than wielding the power that defined manhood in Omego. His home was a modest mud hut, his livestock scarce, and his only treasures were his twin sons, Ikena and Emma, and his wife, Aina, a woman who saw him as nothing more than a chain around her ankles. Hi besties. I am so grateful for your support to Folktales by AJ. Where are you watching from? Let's dive in, but don't forget to like, subscribe and leave a comment. Aina was beautiful, but in her eyes, beauty without wealth was a curse. She longed for a life draped in silk, for fingers adorned with gold, for suitors who would fight for her attention with gifts of rare spices and precious stones. Instead, she was trapped in a life of bare floors and empty pots. Each night, as she sat outside their hut watching the moon cast silver reflections upon the river, she grumbled under her breath, "If only I had calves like my sister Chomoka, I would have married a warrior, a chief, or even a king." But fate had been unkind, gifting her a figure as straight as a yam stick, with no curves to make men stop and stare. No suitor had fought for her hand. Instead, she had been left to marry Moisa, the only man foolish enough to believe that love could fill an empty stomach. Moisa bore her insults like a weary traveler bears the weight of his load, sighing deeply but saying nothing. His sons, on the other hand, had inherited their mother's sharp tongue. "Papa, why are we the poorest family in the village?" Emma would ask, laughing as Ikena poked at his father's belly. "Is it because you are afraid of work? Or because the gods forgot about you?" Moisa would only sigh, for what could he say? In a kingdom where wealth was the measure of a man, he was but a speck of dust in the wind. But fate, mischievous as ever, had plans for Moisa, plans that would begin on the day he met the old man by the roadside. It was an ordinary afternoon, the market bustling with traders and villagers haggling over yams and cloth, when Moisa stumbled upon an old blind man sitting under a baobab tree, a handful of coins spread before him. "Please, kind stranger," the old man called, "help me separate these coins. My sight fails me." The people of Omego were cunning, their hearts hardened by the desire for wealth, and so they ignored the old man, taking his gold and silver and leaving behind only worthless copper. But Moisa, ever the simple soul, knelt before the man and carefully sorted the coins, returning the gold and silver to their rightful owner. As he turned to leave, the old man called out, "Wait. You have done what few would do. Because of your honesty, I grant you 7 wishes, 1 for each day of the week. But be warned, you cannot wish for more wishes, nor can you wish for the death of another." Before Moisa could respond, the man vanished like mist in the morning sun. Heart pounding, Moisa ran home, bursting through the door like a man possessed. "Aina! Aina! You will not believe what happened," he cried, breathless with excitement. His wife, busy stirring a pot of watery soup, barely glanced at him. If it is not a bag of gold or news that you have finally decided to be a man, I do not want to hear it. Moise ignored her sharp words, his grin unwavering. I have been given 7 wishes. A spirit ancestor granted them to me. Ayene's stirring slowed, her eyes narrowing. 7 wishes, she echoed, the weight of those words settling in her mind like a stone in a river. And what do you plan to wish for, my foolish husband? A bigger farm. A softer bed. Her lips curled in disdain. If you had any sense, you would wish for wealth. Or a bigger house. Or better yet, wish for a strong, round belly like the successful men in this village. I am tired of looking at your lizard stomach. Moise, stubborn as he was, refused to be swayed. But Aina, relentless as the midday sun, pestered and moaned until he could bear it no longer. Fine, he shouted in frustration. Then I wish for a big belly. No sooner had the words left his lips than his once flat stomach swelled into a round, protruding mass, making him look like a man who had swallowed an entire harvest. Both husband and wife stared in horror at the miraculous sight. You foolish man! Aina screeched. You have wasted a wish on this. Moise clutched his stomach in dismay, his face twisted in regret. You are the one who told me to wish for it, he bellowed, but his words did little to calm his wife's fury. Their sons, drawn by the commotion, entered the hut and immediately burst into laughter. Papa! Emma cried, pointing at his father's bloated form. Did you eat the moon? Ikeno doubled over, tears streaming down his cheeks. No, no. I think he swallowed the whole village. Moise groaned, realizing that his first wish had been squandered. And so, as the sun set over Omego, the once ordinary farmer lay in bed, tossing and turning, cursing the day he had ever set eyes on a spirit ancestor. But while Moise wrestled with his regret, Ayene's mind raced with possibility. 7 wishes. Well, 6 now, thanks to her useless husband. But 6 was still enough. She had always dreamed of possessing the curves of a goddess, the kind that made men stumble over their own feet, the kind that made women seethe with envy. And now, with the power of wishes in her grasp, she would finally have what had been denied to her. As dawn broke, Moise, unable to bear the discomfort any longer, used his second wish. I wish for this belly to disappear, he groaned, and in an instant it was gone. But no sooner had he sighed in relief than Ayene's furious voice filled the hut. You empty-headed yam! You have wasted another wish. Moise barely had time to respond before chaos erupted. A thrown pot. A gasp of pain. A son crumbling to the ground. And just like that, Ikeno lay still, unconscious. Panic gripped the family, and Moise, without hesitation, used his third wish. I wish for my son to wake up. And just as swiftly as he had fallen, Ikeno's eyes fluttered open. Relief flooded Moise's heart, but when he turned to his wife, he found not gratitude, but rage. Chimo! Aina cried. You have wasted yet another wish. You useless man. Moise's patience, worn thin by years of mockery, snapped. And what would you have me wish for, Aina? What do you want so badly? Without missing a beat, Aina straightened her back, lifted her chin, and declared, I want to be the most desirable woman in the village. I want every man to look at me and be filled with longing. Moise looked at her, his heart heavy with disgust. Vanity. That was all she cared about. But he was too tired to argue. Fine, he muttered. Tomorrow, you shall wake up with your wish granted. And so, as the first light of morning crept through the cracks of their mud hut, Aina rose from her bed and felt it immediately, the shift in her body, the weight in her hips, the fullness of her form. She stepped outside, and as she walked through the village, her newly acquired curves swayed like a pendulum, casting a spell over every man she passed. Eyes widened. Jaws dropped. Some men even forgot to breathe. And thus, the madness began. The sun had barely risen over Omega when the village awoke to a sight that would change its fate forever. Aina, once overlooked and dismissed, now carried herself with a newfound confidence, her transformation so striking that even the birds seemed to pause their morning songs to take notice. Her waist curved like the winding river, her hips swayed like a dancer caught in the rhythm of the talking drums, and her skin, smooth and glowing, held a radiance that had never been there before. She moved through the market square with deliberate steps, relishing the sensation of eyes trailing after her, men tripping over their own feet, and women whispering in hushed voices of jealousy. She no longer needed to announce her presence was a force all its own. Among those most affected was Nook, the strongest hunter in the village, a man known for wrestling leopards with his bare hands. He had never paid Aina any mind before, but as she passed his stall where fresh antelope meat was displayed, his grip on his knife slackened, and he stared as if he had seen a goddess. "By the gods," he murmured, "who is this vision before me?" His hunting companion, Ojadaik, elbowed him hard. "Fool, that is Aina, Moise's wife." But even as Ojadaik spoke, his own eyes were locked on her swaying figure. Moise's wife? Impossible. She was plain as maize stalks only yesterday. The murmur spread like wildfire. From the fisherman by the riverbanks to the elders seated under the great baobab tree, Aine's transformation became the only topic of discussion. Even the young men, who had never before given her a second glance, now found themselves drawn to her like moths to a flame. The blacksmith, whose hands were forever calloused from the forge, found himself polishing his tools with nervous energy. The merchant, who once haggled ruthlessly, now handed her goods without demanding payment. Even the village chief, a man with 3 wives and no patience for distractions, found himself watching her with something dangerous in his gaze. Moise, oblivious at first, only realized the extent of the chaos when he arrived at the farm and noticed that none of the young men he had hired were working. Instead, they stood at the edge of the field, whispering among themselves, their gazes fixed toward the market. "What are you fools standing around for?" Moise demanded. One of the men, barely able to tear his eyes away, stammered, It is Aina, master. She has changed." Moise frowned. Changed. He turned to follow their line of sight, and what he saw nearly made him drop his hoe. His wife, his plain, bitter wife, was standing in the center of the market square, surrounded by men who looked at her as though she were the last drop of rain in the desert. Moise's heart clenched. He had made a terrible mistake. Back at home, Aina was basking in the attention, twirling in front of a cracked bronze mirror, admiring the new body she had been granted. When Moise stormed in, his face red with anger, she barely spared him a glance. "What have you done?" he hissed. Aina smirked. "I have done nothing. You, my dear husband, have done everything." Moise clenched his fist. "This is madness. Do you not see the way the men look at you?" Even the chief's sons were staring. Aina shrugged, running a hand over the curve of her hip. "Is it my fault that the gods have finally blessed me? Is it a crime to be beautiful?" Moise groaned, running a hand through his hair. He could already feel the balance of his home shifting. For years, Aina had resented him, but she had been his. Now, she belonged to the gaze of every man in the village. And he knew men were dangerous when they wanted something they could not have. That evening, as Moise sat outside their hut, lost in thought, a shadow loomed over him. It was Nwok, the hunter, his broad shoulders tense. "Moise," he said, his voice low. "Let us speak as men." Moise narrowed his eyes. "About what?" Nwok did not flinch. "Your wife." The words sent a chill down Moise's spine. "What about my wife?" She is too beautiful for a man like you. It is unfair, really. Moise clenched his jaw. She is my wife, Nwok. The hunter smiled, slow and knowing. Yes. For now. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Moise gripping his knees, a pit forming in his stomach. As the days passed, the madness only grew. Men began to quarrel in the market square over who would offer Aina the most gifts. A young fisherman, desperate to impress her, dove into the deepest part of the river in search of the rarest pearls, nearly drowning in the process. A wealthy merchant, a man who had never been denied anything, stood outside Moise's hut with a bag of gold, offering to buy Aina outright. The village elders, seeing the chaos unfold, called for an emergency gathering, and as Moise sat among them, his face drawn with worry, he realized what they were about to ask. Moise, the chief began, his fingers drumming against his staff. We have all seen what has become of your wife. Her beauty is unnatural. It has disrupted the order of our village. Moise's throat tightened. What are you saying, my chief? The elder sighed. It would be best if you let her go. Let her go. The words echoed in his mind like a death sentence. Moise stood abruptly. She is my wife. I will not give her to another man. But the elders only exchanged knowing looks. They had seen this before. A man fighting for a woman who was already lost. That night, as Moise lay beside Aina, staring at the thatched roof above them, he whispered, "They want me to let you go." Aina, who had been staring at her reflection in a small bronze dish filled with water, did not answer. He turned to face her. "Aina, do you even love me anymore?" She finally looked at him then, and for the first time since her transformation, Moise saw something in her eyes that frightened him. Hunger. Not for him, not for love, but for more. "I have been given a gift, Moise. I do not intend to waste it." The final blow came the next morning. Moise awoke to find the bed empty, his wife's clothes gone, her scent lingering but her presence vanished. Panic surged through him. He ran out into the village, his heart pounding. And then he saw her. Standing beneath the baobab tree, dressed in a new, brightly colored wrapper, her hair adorned with beads and gold, was Aina, smiling as Nwok and the chief's eldest son argued over who would get to escort her to the river. Moise felt his knees weaken. She had not been taken. She had chosen to live. The men in the village had won. Aina was no longer his. And as he stood there, watching her disappear into the crowd, Moise realized that some wishes were never meant to be made. Moise sat in the dust outside his empty hut, his hands trembling as he ran them over his face. The sun was high in the sky, but its warmth did nothing to chase away the cold that had settled in his bones. He had lost her. His wife, his tormentor, his burden, his Aina, was gone, and the village had swallowed her whole. The men who once mocked him now laughed behind his back, celebrating the fact that the most desirable woman in Omega was no longer bound to a man they deemed unworthy. But Moise was not a fool. He knew that beauty as unnatural as Aina's came at a price. And as he stared at the footprints she had left in the dust, he whispered, "What have I done?" In the days that followed, the madness only grew. Aina had become more than just a woman, she was a force, a fever, a hunger that no man could quench. The men of Omega, warriors and fishermen, traders and hunters, all fought for the privilege of being in her presence. They showered her with gifts, gold, rare spices, silken cloth, and the finest beads from distant lands. Some built huts in the hopes that she would choose to live with them, while others abandoned their wives, believing that no other woman could compare. But Aina, clever as ever, accepted their offerings without giving any man the satisfaction of claiming her. "I belong to no one but myself," she declared, her voice dripping with the power of someone who had tasted what it meant to be worshipped. But there were those who were not so easily fooled. The village elders watched the chaos unfold with narrowed eyes. Omego had always been a land of order, where men ruled with strength and women played their roles as caretakers and mothers. But now, everything was crumbling. The chief's sons, once wise and calculating, had begun to bicker like children over who would win Aine's favor. The hunters neglected their traps, the fishermen returned from the river empty-handed, and the merchants forgot their trades as they sat outside Aine's hut, hoping for a mere glance from her dark, enchanting eyes. The women of the village, their hearts burning with resentment, gathered in secret, whispering curses under their breath. "She has bewitched them," they said. "No woman should hold this much power. It is unnatural." The whispers turned into warnings. The warnings turned into threats. And soon, the village began to turn against her. One evening, as Aina bathed in the river, a group of women approached her. Their faces were hard, their eyes dark with something dangerous. "Aina," said Adiku, the chief's first wife, her voice steady but cold. "You must leave Omego." Aina scoffed, tilting her head. "And why should I do that? I have done nothing wrong." Adiku stepped closer. "You have done everything wrong. You have broken the balance of this village. You have turned husbands against their wives, fathers against their sons. Omego was at peace before you made yourself into this thing." The other women murmured in agreement. "Leave now, before it is too late." Aina only laughed, a sound as sweet as it was cruel. "You fear me," she said, running her hands over her golden-wrapped waist. "Because for the first time, a woman is more powerful than a man." But Adeku did not flinch. "We do not fear you, Aina. We fear what you have unleashed." And with that, they left her standing in the river, their warning hanging in the air like a blade waiting to fall. That night, the first signs of the curse appeared. Nwok, the hunter, who had once stood tall and unshaken, began to grow weak. His hands trembled as he tried to string his bow, his vision blurred as he attempted to track his prey. He, the strongest man in the village, now found himself struggling to even stand. "It is the gods," he cried, falling to his knees before the elders. "They punish me for my desire." But he was not the only one. One by one, the men who had pursued Aina began to suffer. Some fell ill, their bodies burning with fever. Others found themselves unable to speak, their voices stolen by an unseen force. And worst of all, some disappeared entirely, vanishing into the night without a trace. The village was in chaos. The women, seeing their tormentors reduced to shadows of themselves, whispered among themselves. "It is justice," they said. "The gods have had enough." But Moise knew better. This was no act of the gods. This was the price of the wish he had made. Desperate for answers, he sought out Madame Busy, the oldest woman in the village, known for her knowledge of things unseen. He found her outside her hut, her wrinkled hands grinding herbs into a fine powder. "You seek the truth, Moise," she said before he could speak. He nodded. "Aine's beauty, it was my wish. But I did not know it would bring this madness upon us." Madame Busy sighed, her eyes filled with something Moise could not name. "You played with forces beyond your understanding, boy. Beauty that is not earned is a dangerous thing. It is hunger without satisfaction. Desire without peace. It does not end until there is nothing left to take." Moise's breath came fast. "Then how do I stop it?" The old woman looked at him, her gaze piercing. "You must undo the wish. You must return her to the way she was." Moise felt his stomach twist. To take back the wish would mean to strip Anna of everything she had gained. The power. The admiration. The freedom she had longed for. And yet, to let it continue would mean the ruin of Omega. The curse would not stop. It would consume every man who had desired her. It would not end with longing, it would end with death. As Moise left Madame Busy's hut, his mind raced. He had only 3 wishes left. 3 chances to make things right. But deep in his heart, he knew Aina would never give up her beauty willingly. And if she knew what he planned to do, she would never forgive him. That night, as the wind howled through the trees and the fires in the village burned low, Moise stood outside Aine's new hut, his hands clenched into fists. Inside, he could hear her laughter, the sound of men vying for her attention, their voices slurred with wine and desperation. She was a queen among them. A goddess. But she was also cursed. And Moise knew that if he did not act now, there would soon be nothing left of her to save. Moise did not sleep that night. He sat by the dying embers of his fire, staring into the darkness, his mind a storm of thoughts. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like a boulder. He had 3 wishes left, 3 opportunities to undo the disaster he had unleashed upon Omego. But how could he take back what Aina had now claimed as her identity? Would she even allow it? He knew her too well. She would fight, she would refuse, she would rather see the village burn than return to the woman she once was. But Moise also knew that time was running out. The curse was spreading, devouring the village like a slow-moving fire, and if he did nothing, Omega would be left in ruins. At dawn, he set out to find her. The village was unusually quiet, the usual morning bustle subdued under the heavy air of dread. The men were weak, their bodies wasted from sleepless nights and fevers that refused to break. The women moved in silence, their eyes filled with fear and contempt. It was clear, Omega was no longer under the rule of its chief. It was under the rule of desire. And that desire had a name, Aina. Moise found her where he expected, by the river, her reflection shimmering on the water's surface like a vision of something divine. She sat on a stone, draped in the finest cloth gifted to her by her admirers, her arms adorned with golden bracelets that jingled with each movement. When she heard his footsteps, she turned, her lips curling into a knowing smile. "Have you come to admire me too, Moise? Have you finally seen what all the others see?" Moise clenched his fist. "This has gone too far, Aina. You must see that." She laughed, the sound as light as the breeze rustling through the reeds. "Too far? No, my dear husband, this is only the beginning. For the first time in my life, I am not invisible. For the first time, I am worshipped." Moise stepped closer. "You are not worshipped, Aina. You are feared. And soon, you will be hated." She tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Let them hate me. They will still desire me." Moise's breath came fast. "This is not you. The woman I married, she was cruel, yes. She was selfish. But she was real. This is a nightmare." Her expression darkened. "Do not speak as if you ever truly knew me, Moise. You never did. If you had, you would have wished for this long ago." He took another step forward, his voice softening. "And if I told you that this beauty is cursed? That the men who have fallen under your spell are paying the price with their lives?" For the first time, something flickered in Aine's gaze, hesitation. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "You are lying," she said, though her voice was quieter now. Moise shook his head. "Nwok can barely walk. The chief's sons are bedridden with fever. Some have disappeared entirely. Does that sound like admiration to you? Or does it sound like punishment?" She looked away, her fingers tightening around the golden bangles on her wrist. "It is not my fault," she whispered. "I did not ask them to want me." Moise exhaled slowly. "But you did. With my wish. And now, you must let me take it back." She stood abruptly, her posture stiff. "No." Moise felt the last bit of patience leave him. "Then you will watch Omega fall. And when the last man is gone, when there is nothing left but dying embers and whispers of what was, you will be alone. A breeze rippled through the trees, carrying the weight of his words between them. Aine's chest rose and fell, her face unreadable. For the first time since this all began, she seemed uncertain. But before she could answer, a scream shattered the air. They both turned toward the village, where smoke was rising into the sky. Without another word, Moise took off running, his heart hammering against his ribs. Aina followed, her feet barely touching the ground. When they reached the main square, chaos awaited them. Women wailed, children clung to their mothers, and the remaining elders stood in a tight circle around something on the ground. Moise pushed through, his breath catching in his throat when he saw what lay before him. It was the chief's eldest son, his body still, his skin drained of color. His mouth was open, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. But it was not death that sent shivers down Moise's spine, it was what was carved into his chest. A single word, deep and jagged, written in something dark. Desire. Aina inhaled sharply, her hands flying to her mouth. The elders turned their gaze to her, and in that moment, Moise knew what they saw. They did not see a woman blessed by the gods. They saw a monster. This is her doing, one of the women cried. She has cursed us all. Kill her, another voice shouted. End this madness. The crowd surged forward. Moise acted on instinct, grabbing Aine's arm and pulling her back. Run, he shouted, and they bolted toward the forest. The villagers chased them, their fury fueled by grief and fear. But Moise knew these paths well, he led Aina through narrow trails, past the thick underbrush, until the sounds of pursuit faded. When they finally stopped, gasping for breath, Aina turned to him, her eyes wide. They will kill me. Moise nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. Yes. And they will be right too. She flinched as if struck. You think I deserve this? Moise let out a bitter laugh. What did you expect, Aina? That the world would let you take everything without consequence? That beauty without price could exist? She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. I didn't want this. I only wanted to be seen. Moise closed his eyes. Then let me fix it. Silence stretched between them. Then, finally, with a slow nod, Aina whispered, do it. Moise took a deep breath. His hands trembled as he looked up at the sky, at the gods who had given him this cursed gift. I wish for Aina to be as she was before. The moment the words left his lips, the air around them shifted. The golden glow that had clung to Aine's skin faded. Her curves softened, her unnatural beauty dissolving like mist. She fell to her knees, gripping the earth beneath her fingers, her body shaking. When she looked up, Moise saw it, the old Aina, the one he had always known. The woman who was flawed and bitter, who had scorned him and resented her life, but who had been real. A sob escaped her lips, raw and broken. It's gone. Moise knelt beside her. It had to be. She buried her face in her hands. And the men? The ones who suffered? Moise swallowed. They will heal. The dead cannot return. But Omega will mend. They sat there for a long time, the weight of what had passed pressing down on them. Finally, Aina lifted her gaze, and for the first time, she looked at Moise not with disdain, but with something close to understanding. You saved me. He shook his head. No, Aina. I only undid what should never have been. The village would not welcome them back easily. Trust, once broken, was not so easily mended. But as the wind carried away the last remnants of the curse, Moise knew that they had both learned a lesson neither would ever forget. Some things were not meant to be wished for. And desire, once unleashed, was a fire that could consume everything in its path. The sky over Omego was heavy with the weight of what had passed. The village, once filled with the sounds of laughter and life, was now a place of whispered caution and wary glances. The curse that had taken hold of its people was lifting, but the scars it left behind were deep, etched into the hearts of those who had lost their fathers, brothers, and sons to the madness that had consumed them. Moise and Aina stood at the edge of the forest, watching as the villagers slowly gathered in the square, their faces unreadable. They had returned, but they were not welcome. The trust that had been broken could not be mended in a single day, nor could the weight of Aine's transformation be erased with a single wish. As they stepped forward, the murmurs grew. The women who had cursed Aina now looked at her with a mix of relief and unease, for the power that had once drawn their husbands to her was gone, but the memory of it remained. The men, those who had suffered under the weight of their own longing, averted their gazes, ashamed of their weakness, ashamed of what they had become in the presence of something they could not control. And at the center of it all stood the chief, his gaze heavy, his hands clasped before him. "Moise," he said, his voice carrying through the square, "you have returned." Moise nodded, his grip tightening around Aine's wrist, as if he feared she might disappear again. "The curse is broken," he said. "Aina is as she was before." The chief studied Aina for a long moment before speaking. "And yet, we have paid a price. Lives have been lost. Families have been torn apart. The gods do not give without taking." He stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Moises. "What will you do to atone?" The question was not unexpected, but it settled like a stone in Moises' chest. What could he do? He had been the one to make the wish, the one to unleash this chaos upon his people. He had been blinded by frustration, by the ceaseless complaints of his wife, by his own longing for peace. And now, he was being asked to pay for his mistake. He lowered his head. "I will leave Omega." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Aina turned to him, eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" Moise took a deep breath. "We will leave. We will find a new life beyond this village. It is the only way." The chief nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is for the best. Omega must heal. And you, both of you, must learn what it means to live with the choices you have made." He turned to the crowd. "Let them go. Let them find their fate beyond these walls." There was no argument, no outcry. Only silence. And that silence was more painful than any punishment Moise could have imagined. The journey away from Omega was slow, each step heavy with the weight of the past. They walked in silence, the only sound the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. Aina did not speak, did not argue, did not lash out as she once might have. Instead, she walked beside Moise, her shoulders squared, her face unreadable. It was only when the village was no longer in sight that she finally spoke. "Do you hate me?" Moise did not answer immediately. He thought of the years they had spent together, of the bitterness, the resentment, the quiet moments of laughter that had been rare but real. He thought of the wish that had changed everything, the fire of desire that had nearly consumed them all. And then, he thought of the woman beside him, the woman who had been given everything she had ever wanted, only to lose it all. "No," he said finally. "I do not hate you. But I do not know who we are anymore." Aina swallowed hard, her hands clenching at her sides. "Neither do I." They traveled for days, following the river that wound through the land like a silver ribbon, stopping only to rest beneath the shade of great trees, their roots twisted like the fates of those who saw too much. They spoke little, their conversations filled with unspoken truths, with the ghost of what they had been and the uncertainty of what they would become. And then, on the seventh day, they arrived at a new village, a place unknown, untouched by the curse that had ruined them. The people there were kind but cautious, welcoming them as strangers, offering food and a place to sleep in exchange for stories of where they had come from. But Moise and Aina did not speak of Omega. They did not speak of the wishes or the madness that had followed. They only spoke of the land, of the river, of the need to start anew. And slowly, day by day, they built something different. Not a home, not yet. But the beginnings of something that could one day be called peace. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aina sat by the river, staring at her reflection. "Do you think they will ever forgive us?" she asked. Moise sat beside her, watching the water ripple in the fading light. "I do not know. But perhaps that is not what matters anymore." Aina nodded slowly. "Perhaps not." They sat in silence, the weight of the past lingering between them. And as the stars began to appear, as the world around them settled into quiet, Moise took Aina's hand in his own. It was not love, not yet. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. For they had learned the lesson that many before them had ignored, that desire, when left unchecked, was not a gift. It was a fire. And if one was not careful, it would burn everything to ash. Thank you besties for watching till the end. What do you think of this story, and did it remind you of anyone? Please share in the comment section. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to Folktales by IJ, so we can keep bringing you inspiring African folktale stories on Folktales by IJ.